Hello everyone, welcome to today's session which is about decoding careers in finance. Today we have with us Ritesh Kala. Yeah, thank you so much Ritesh for joining. I was just giving them a brief about your profile, about your MBA in finance from NMIMS, your CFA background, and then you moved to PwC and Capveda and founder at Kidlet, and a lot of things in your profile. Would like to request you also to once briefly introduce, and there are already a lot of inflow of questions that are coming up. So after the introduction about you, about Kidlet, we could like to take the Q&A.
Sure. So I'll keep this very short since, I think all of this has already been covered. I completed my MBA in 2006, worked in Citi initially and then in PwC in investment banking for about 4 years. After that, I joined Capveda, which is basically a chemical company. But what I was doing there is I was leading their inorganic growth, right? So as part of that, everything, so they were doing a lot of acquisitions and things like this. So I was driving all of that. Did that for a few years. And after that, I started my own business. I think you guys have already heard. So I run a business called Kidlet. It is in the education space. And what we do is we work with schools, especially we work with government schools in both urban as well as rural areas. And we've created a learning improvement program, and we actually use that to help students improve learning outcomes. So that's a very short and quick introduction about me. Obviously, if anyone has questions about specific things which I did as part of my career, very happy to discuss that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ritesh, for the brief introduction. And there's a lot of interest for your profile since we are having a speaker from the finance profile, and it's a very lucrative career. There's an inflow of questions. Would like to start taking them one by one. So first is they want to understand after MBA from finance, what are the options available broadly for someone pursuing, and what is a good career option?
So generally what happens is in India, a lot of students doing their MBA, freshers, right? And they haven't really worked ever before this. So if you're a fresher, my personal suggestion is don't be very selective in the kind of companies you apply to during placement season. Look at any companies which are broadly in areas which you want to be in and apply to all of them, because where you start doesn't really matter as much as starting off. So initially, that is what my suggestion is. Once you start off, then what happens is over time you can actually mold your career to actually get to areas you are really interested in. And when I started off in 2006, there weren't as many options as there are today, right? Especially the entire industry of fintech did not really exist at that time. So that is a new industry which is extremely interesting for me. There are a lot of companies doing very interesting things in this space, especially in terms of increasing access to finance for everyone in India. So that is one area where which is a new area you can explore. Other than that, all the traditional areas, whether it is banking, investment banking, insurance, mutual funds, working in corporate finance, in corporates, all of these options are available. What happens is as a fresher, a lot of the times because we just starting work, you will not really get, you will have to start from the beginning, right? What that means is that even companies which hire you, their expectations will be such that you will be learning on the job. And that to me is a wonderful place to be in, because there is a lot to learn when working in finance, right? So the first couple of years at least you will be learning a lot, and only then you will get to a place where you'll start doing very interesting work.
Yes, that makes sense. Thanks, Ritesh, for that. So there are specific questions also for somebody who wants to plan a career in investment banking or portfolio management. What do you recommend how to go about it?
So the investment banking and portfolio management, both of these are very different roles, especially in India. In India, the investment banks don't really offer portfolio management services like they do internationally, right? In India, the two areas are separated. I don't know if this is because of regulatory requirements, but they are, right? In investment banks also, there are two different types of investment banks. One which have access to capital markets and the others which don't. The ones which don't have access to capital markets are the ones which, primarily work on fundraising and mergers and acquisitions. So what happens is, to get to any of these specific, to get into investment banking right at the beginning of your career, that would require you to actually do your MBA from one of the A-list institutes, right? So that would include the IIMs and other institutes of that caliber, right? Because these companies only hire from those places. But but that does not mean that, that you can't get into investment banking no matter, where you've done your MBA from. What that requires is, you might actually need to start in an adjacent industry. For example, I did the same thing, right? When I started at Citi, I started with the KPO. So, you would think that, that's not glamorous work, or, that is not something which I would be interested in. But what that allowed me to do was actually learn the nuances of everything which I needed to actually get into investment banking. And then after I did that, my first change into PwC is where I actually got into investment banking. There, I actually worked on a number of very large deals as well over 3 years. And so then the idea is that transitioning into investment banking at a later stage is also something which is open to you guys. So don't just get stuck on the idea that, I need to get into investment banking from day one.
Ritesh, I think thanks for covering. There are questions like what are the key skills required to be a good investment banker or a good private equity manager?
The key skills, if you ask me, one is that you need to understand, especially in the earlier parts of your career, right? That requires a lot of financial modeling, and that is true at least for the first 2 to 3 years of your career, right? What that means is two things. One is you need to understand how accounting works. A lot of students in finance, especially doing their MBA, don't really concentrate on accounting. But what happens is, unless you understand this, a lot of times you will not be actually be able to work on financial models. So that is something which I would suggest you really concentrate on. The second thing is, of course, you need to understand how the flow of money works. And that is something which you learn in corporate finance. So these are two subjects which, obviously you need to really concentrate on. When it comes to skill sets, one of the few things is that you need to know how to use Excel really well, because that is something you will be using throughout your career. Because at the end of the day, investment banking is a numbers game, right? It is all about actually judging, what numbers a company can achieve, what numbers a company, what numbers will be acceptable to investors. So there is a lot to do with this. So that is something which you have to be extremely comfortable with. Investment banking is a unique space because what happens is, compared to the rest of the finance spaces, investment banking actually requires multiple skills. So one is that, obviously, while understanding of finance, understanding of numbers is important, but you also have to be a good marketer, because at the end of the day, you are selling things, right? You might not be selling the normal things, but what you're doing is you're selling an idea, you're selling a company, you're selling investors on the idea that, the company which you are representing is a good company. So there is a lot of sales and marketing involved in investment banking. You have to be comfortable with that. Other than that, you have to actually be a good people person. So a lot of the work requires you to interact with people and get them to actually buy into your idea, so that you can achieve your objectives. So these are things which, you might not necessarily, associate with work in finance, but this is just as important. So these are things which, you should be concentrating on if you want to get into investment banking, and, are considering that as a long-term career option.
Right. Thanks, Ritesh, for mentioning that as well. So the next question is somebody is currently doing their engineering and they want to pursue a career in finance, but they want to understand other possibilities without an MBA degree, maybe through CFA or something else that you would recommend to make the way in finance.
There are a lot of options now which have opened up. One, of course, is you can work on a professional degree. What happens is, the reason people actually do their MBA is because it covers a very broad array of subjects, right? What that does is it means that, you get a flavor of a lot of different areas of finance, which, you might not get if you're doing another kind of professional degree. But if you want to get into finance, especially from engineering, one of the key things which you will need to do is, you will need to ideally have a professional degree in finance at some point. What that means is, yes, as Alicia mentioned, you can work on your CFA. It is a program which has three different levels, and each level actually tests your knowledge of finance to the core. So this is something, while it is easier compared to course like CA, for example, right, and is open to everyone, no matter what stream you studied till now. But what that means is you will have to get into the nitty gritties of finance to be able to actually complete the course. There are other courses like MSc in finance and things like this, but in India they don't hold as much weightage as an MBA, a CFA, or a CA. So these are the three courses where which have far higher weightage with corporates when it comes to getting into finance. If you want to, but all the other courses, what will happen is you may actually need to take an extra step or two to actually get to where you want to be with your career.
Yes, and would like to mention to the participant, if there's something which is unanswered, please feel free to ask in double down on the questions and re-ask. We'll try to take all the questions. So the next question is it worth doing MBA, let's say from DU? Do you have any thoughts on that, Ritesh? If you want, you can mention about NMIMS instead if you're whatever
Uh,
is your preference.
Sorry, from where?
DU, I think Delhi University.
Oh, so basically, when it comes to an MBA, the college from which you do it, the university which you do it absolutely matters, right? What that means is want to get to an A-list college if possible. If that's not possible, and you've actually tried your best and that's not happening, you can actually take admission in one of the level B colleges. The rankings keep changing every single year, and it has been a very long time since I completed my MBA. I don't know what the A and B level institutes now are, but the idea is if you get into B level or a C level institute, what that means is that you will start at a level which is lower than someone who's done their MBA from an A level institute, right? You might not get into the same companies. You might not actually get in those companies at the same levels. And I have seen this happening myself. When I joined PwC, for example, in my team, I had a couple of people from IMS and I was from NMIMS. And there was a differentiation within the company when it came to, how we were treated to some degree, right?
So the next question is it necessary to have a work experience in finance before the MBA?
While that'll always be a good thing, right? What that does is two things. One is, of course, it'll improve your knowledge of finance. The other is you'll actually be able to relate whatever you're learning to the real world, right? In terms of how things are actually done versus, what you are learning in the classroom. And the third bonus thing is that, when you are in the classroom while you're doing your MBA, you will actually bring a very unique perspective to discussions in the classroom. And that is something which is unique to an MBA. That is how everyone learns, because there is a lot of cross discussion. Everyone brings their perspective and you will have a better perspective to bring. And that is something which will enhance not just you, but the entire classroom. So yes, it is always preferable to have some degree of work experience before you do your MBA. But it does not matter as much in India. It is okay even if you don't. A lot of freshers get into an MBA and they end up doing just as well, right? If you're looking to do an MBA from outside India, you can't actually do that without work experience and building your profile. So that is something which you need to actually consider. If you are looking to go outside India, then you definitely need to work.
All right. Thanks, Ritesh, for mentioning that. So the next question is, what are the top most preferable colleges for MBA in finance in India that you would suggest?
So, there are colleges which are known for certain specialities. For example, MICA is known for communications and marketing, as an example, right? So leave those colleges aside. But other than that, you can look at any of the top Ivy League institutes and they'll all be great. at one point, when I was doing my MBA, and this is obvious, as I said, very, very long back, IIM Calcutta used to be like the top college to go to for finance. But I actually don't know if that's the case currently, right? So I wouldn't know, if there are any which, have now specialized in finance particularly. But according to me, getting into any of the top colleges would work just as well.
All right, thanks. So the next question is around preparation for exams. So is there something that you would like to cover upon, Ritesh?
What
So
what
there's a
what kind
student
of exams?
who is in the final year of BBA and wants to get into top colleges of MBA. Tips for exam preparation is what they're trying to ask.
So as MBA, getting into MBA requires you to actually sit in a very competitive exam. And, this is something which, Alicia can actually contribute to as well. Considering we are on podcast, which is being conducted by IMS. So what that means is there's a lot of preparation which is needed, which is not directly related to the things which you learned very recently. None of that will be covered in these exams. And this is a very specialized way of preparing for these exams. What this means is, unless you actually prepare specifically for it, there's a good chance you will not succeed. There are a lot of classes available to help you do that, both online and offline. But the idea is it requires you to actually work on areas which you probably haven't worked in since school. So that is something which you need to keep in mind. Don't sit for any of these exams without preparation, because while you can, what will happen is the chances that you will succeed is very, very low. So what that means is concentrate on preparing for these exams, especially if you're going to do this right after your BBA. So, and generally there is an overlap, right? I don't know what time the BBA course ends. I am assuming it ends sometime in March. And these exams used to happen in December, right? So you would actually be in your third year when you would be giving this exam, right? So a lot of times, because of that overlap, what that means is you will actually have to take out time to study for this exam. So that is something which you need to consider.
Yes, thanks Ritesh for mentioning about that. So next question is quite interesting. It is about you. You have done various roles in your career. Which one has given you most satisfaction and why?
Okay, that is an interesting question. There are two parts to my career, right? In the first part, I was working in finance in investment banking, and that had its own high, right? There were times where, work was very hectic. There was a lot to do. But what happens is when a deal closes, the kind of high you get from it is very, very different. So that is something which, and that part of me has never gone away as such, right? Even today, for example, if people approach me for fundraising, or friends come to me to discuss anything in investment banking, it actually is something which is very close to my heart still. But when I actually quit all of that and start my own business, I think for me that would be the part of my career which I cherish most, because it is something which I am truly passionate about. We work in education, and that is an area which I really want to help change. And it is because of that passion. What that means is, that is always going to come out on top, no matter what the question is. So for me, it is always going to be that the work which I'm doing right now, for me, that will always come out on top, will always be my number one, no matter what.
Yes, thanks, Ritesh. The passion is clearly visible and it's also inspirational to people who maybe want to do something of their own. It's amazing. So, we would like to discuss about Kidlet in the later part. It would be inspiring to hear from you how to start and how and what you are doing, why you are building this. We have a lot of other questions related to finance. We will take that and then come to Kidlet. All right, thanks, Ritesh, for giving us all that hope. So, the next question is actually, there are a lot of questions where people are asking about what courses would you suggest for finance. There are also specific questions like if somebody is interested to gain knowledge about equity or capital markets specifically, what courses would you suggest and so on. Or if somebody is interested in specific courses about finance, what are your best recommendations to prepare before MBA?
So when it comes to specific courses other than an MBA or the other professional courses which I mentioned, what happens is that every industry has its own courses. So if you want to work, if you're working with mutual funds, right, they will actually mandate that you complete a couple of courses which are required to actually work in that space. So those are courses which are directly linked to industries, right? If you want to work with a brokerage firm, right? There are courses which mandated by the government that you actually have to complete these courses for you to be able to work in these companies. So those courses, obviously, depending on where you want to work and what the requirements are, you will have to complete. So those courses I will not touch on. But if there are specific other courses which people want me to discuss, very happy to discuss those. I did see someone ask me about NISM over here in chat, and again, that's a mandated course according to me. I may be wrong. I will need to look it up. But if it is one of the mandated courses, then what that means is if you want to work in that space, you have to do it no matter what. Even after doing your MBA and a CA and a CFA, you might have all the degrees in the world, but if you want to work in that industry, you have to do that course again, right? So these kind of courses, obviously, only do if you are actually going to go work in that specific industry.
All right. There are questions about what are some must read books for a finance aspirant, or some books to get a better grip on finance other than what is taught in college.
Any books which, there were a couple of very good books on, I don't know if you guys are old enough to actually remember the financial collapse back in 2006 7. But there are a couple of very good books which cover that aspect. There are books which are linked to manias, financial mania specifically. I would suggest you look up books on that and read on that. There are books which are which are written by the greats of finance. So anything written by Warren Buffett, for example, or any of these greats, you can look up and pick up those books. They will have gems of advice you will never find anywhere else. Look at books which these guys recommend. There are books which are recommended by them. Read those, right? But what happens is some of these books are easy to read if you don't know too much about finance and are just preparing to get into finance. And there are others which are far more difficult to actually understand if you don't have experience in finance. So what that means is, pick up and read books, which sound interesting, but you may actually want to revisit them after, you worked in finance for a few years, because, you'll get far more insights once you do that. So yeah, so lots and lots of great books out there. Sorry, I can't recollect specific names, but the idea is look up these topics, and I'm sure those books will pop up right at the top when you search for these specific topics.
All right. Thanks, Ritesh, for mentioning. There, the next question is, how are audit and finance different? Also, the question is, if someone wants to start a career in audit and then pursue, I think it's CFA side by side, and eventually switch to finance, or it's CPA. I don't know if that is different. Would that be a good start?
So CPA and CA are very similar. The difference is that CPA is the course which you need to do to be able to practice in the US. CA is the course which you need to do to be able to practice in India, right? Both of them are related to accounting specifically. And what that means is if you want to work in audit, these are the courses which you want to actually complete. Because a lot of times what happens is, for example, in India, the only people who can sign off on an audit is a CA, right? So you need to actually do these courses to get into audit. An MBA would not actually work over here at all. One, because the level of understanding of accounting which is needed to be able to get into audit is far far higher than what is taught during an MBA, and something which you can even learn on your own. Audit is a combination of accounting and law, and that is something which both these subjects are covered very very deeply during a CA. And that is the course which I would recommend that you do if you want to get into audit specifically. When it comes to what is audit, right, what audit does is it does two things. One is it establishes the how truthful a company is being about where they are. So you hear all the time that company X has announced their results recently. right? They announce quarterly results or annual results. So what an audit does is it actually judges how truthful a company is being when they're making these announcements, for example, right? So these are, if these numbers are certified by an auditor, that means that yes, you can actually be fair, you can fairly establish that, the company is being truthful. Not always the case, but definitely most of the times. The second thing which an audit does, and there are two parts to audit. One is a financial audit, which is what I was talking about. And then the second part is an internal audit, which, is more an assessment of where the company is for the company itself. So, an internal audit is done to understand, where a company is, what can be done better and things like this. That is far more, for me, ideally, it should be far more in depth, because, that is something which can actually help a company in understanding what they can do better. So, yeah, audit is a great area to work in, but it requires specialized knowledge, which, anyone, for example, who is working in investments or any of the other financial industries will not need. So you will have to actually mold your courses and your career to be in that space specifically. So that is something which you want to keep, which you want to remember, and work towards.
All right, thanks Ritesh for giving clarity about that. There are a lot of questions on people who are interested a lot in stock market and trading and have huge interest towards it. They want to know what are the career options available specifically in stock markets or trading.
So see, stock market and trading is something which, has very low barriers to entry. So there are the courses which are required are extremely simple, and it is fairly easy if you want to start off on your own as well, right? When it comes to actually working in the space, there are a lot of areas which are open. One is, of course, related to research. The other is related to fund management, right? These are areas where, there are a lot of career opportunities available, especially for growth, right? So what will happen is, if you get into these two spaces, what that will allow you to do is actually grow your career for the long term. I know a lot of people in both these spaces, and I know that they're doing extremely well. So these areas are both extremely lucrative as well. So, but if you want to get into these spaces, what that means is, again, a professional course, especially if you want to get into research. An MBA is really, really beneficial, because, during your MBA, one of the key things which you learn is, how to research any topic which, comes to mind. So an MBA would be extremely beneficial if you want to get into research specifically. CFA helps as well. It is now getting started acceptable in India to have a CFA instead of an MBA if you want to get into investment specifically. So both of these courses are great from that perspective. When it comes to actually, so when you say stock market specifically, right? What I want, and the person who asked the question can maybe clarify if they have, if I've not covered it from the perspective they had in mind. But when it comes to stock market specifically, okay, if you mean trading, a lot of the times what happens is there are career opportunities available which will require you to actually have knowledge which you will not have during the start of your career. So a lot of times it is very difficult to start your career in trading unless you're trading for someone else, or you're putting in trades for someone else, right? So what that does is, and one of the ways to actually get into the stock market is to actually start on the research side, and over time, mold your career to transition to the investment side of things. So that is something to keep in mind.
All right, thanks, Ritesh. The next question is, what are the career options available for someone who doesn't want to go in core finance, but more of financial management instead?
When you say financial management, I'm assuming you're talking of finance in traditional corporates. So what happens is, every large company has a finance department, and working there versus working in areas such as investments or research is extremely different. Because what happens is, over there, things like accounting, things like knowledge of law, all of this becomes absolutely critical. Keeping track of compliances becomes extremely critical. uh So the things like understanding, cash flows becomes extremely critical. So these are things which, you learn the best in when you're doing a CA. So if you want to get into corporate finance in a company, ideally that is where you want to start. If you don't really have a professional degree, then at the very least you need to know accounting well, because if you want to start in the finance department without a professional, without having a CA, for example, in India, then you would ideally most likely start in the accounting department where you're doing accounting entries, for example. I'm assuming we're on this podcast, so everyone is looking to do professional courses over here. And if that is the case, and if you want to get into this space, then the best course for you to do is doing a CA rather than an MBA, because that will be far more valuable, and the knowledge you gain during a CA will be far more important to actually complete, work in this profile.
All right, thanks, Ritesh. The next question is, how is NMIMS Mumbai, your MBA college for finance?
So NMIMS used to be amazing when I was there. Obviously, it has changed massively since I was there. When I was there, it was a fairly small college. There were only about 400 students studying there. And we did not have the jazzy new complex which is now there today, right? We used to still study in the old building, and we used to have an open campus and things like this. All of that has gone away now. But NMIMS is still a great college. It now has a lot more options, not just in Mumbai, but I'm sure in multiple other cities, as well as internationally now. But it is one of the premier institutes to study in, and it has a lot of weightage when it comes to, in the corporate world as well. So if you say that you've done your MBA from NMIMS, people will believe that, you have some degree or some caliber, and will hold you at a higher esteem than some doing it from some other college, for example, right? So yeah, so NMIMS is a great college to actually think of when doing these courses. I think they also actually create a lot of routes to actually get into an MBA now, as compared to when we were there. They've started dual degree courses which, and they've actually expanded their courses significantly. When we were there were only three streams available, right? We had four streams now. We had finance, marketing, operations, and HR. That was it. Now I remember they started capital market MBA in capital markets when I was in my second year. And from what I hear, they've added a lot more streams now. So, you can actually now work on specializations which you're interested in. So yeah, great institute. Something you should definitely consider if you're looking to study in Mumbai.
All right, thanks, Ritesh. So for the participants, I'd like to tell we like to take one or two last questions because the session time is limited. So if there's something which you feel it's uncovered, please do feel free to put in your questions. We'll try to take those. But Ritesh, there are one or two questions which I can see which are uncovered. We'd like to come to that and then go to Kidlet. So one is, how is management consulting different from investment banking career?
So management consulting is not really finance as such, right? In management consulting, you will be working in every single area of the corporate world. So it could be related to. So I know people in consulting which have worked on projects which are related to improving employee morale, for example. So that is not related to finance at all, right? They have worked on projects which related to increasing operational efficiencies at companies, for example. Again, not related to finance at all. So what that means is, if you want to get into management consulting, you will need to be a generalist. You need to know about everything when it comes to management, and you will need to be able to think on your toes. You will need to come up with unique solutions to very difficult problems. So these are things which, a management consulting consultant does. Finance obviously is extremely different. The two actually don't really have too much overlap when it comes to, the kind of work which you will be working in, the kind of work you will be doing. What happens is, over time, the two actually start getting closer. So, if you worked, for example, if you worked in investment banking for a long time, right? So there are ways to transition from investment banking to management consulting in specific roles, right? But when at the start, the two of them are extremely different. There is absolutely no overlap, and there are no easy areas for you to transition from one to the other, unless you have specific, if you unless you have specific parts of your career which align to investment to management consulting. So as an example, nowadays there is this new concept called founder's office, right? If you've done an MBA, for example, you can become part of a founder's office of a large startup or even traditional company. What that does is it gives you exposure to everything that happens in the company, and that is a great place to work if you're looking to transition into management consulting, for example, because that is the kind of knowledge which these companies would find extremely valuable. But if you're working in traditional finance, so for example, if you've been in equity research, or if you've been in fund management, then these areas don't really link to management consulting at all, and it would be very, very difficult for you to transition from these areas into management consulting. So again, take the first few years to gain clarity in terms of where your interest lies, where you want to build the majority of your career, and use those initial years to work towards that area. So choose roles which are suitable for you to get there, rather than, so obviously every person has their own priorities. So for some people, what they're doing, where they're working doesn't matter as long as the money is great. For other people, they have a very specific goal in mind, that I want to work in this area because that is what is of my interest. So they don't care about anything else till they get to that place. So as a person, you will have to understand, you will have to think about all of these things, and then take decisions in terms of what you want to do with your career. But yes, the two don't really have, finance and management consulting don't have a lot of overlap in terms of both knowledge base as well as work.
Ritesh, there are a lot of people here who are very aspirational and would love to know about your entrepreneurship journey. What motivated you to switch from a great career in finance to that, and what are you looking to build? What is your larger vision?
So when it comes to starting off your own on your own, right? I have, because of my work in investment banking and now as an entrepreneur, I have spoken with a lot of people over the years, right? And everyone finds their own reasons to start off. Not everyone can start off immediately, because obviously starting off will require some degree of capital which you will need to invest. But when I started off, the reason I did is very simple. I was working in finance, it was a great career and so on. But at some point, what happens is you get to a place where you decide what is more important. Whether you want to continue your career in finance, or whether you want to actually finally give in and start working on something which you've been passionate for a very, very long time. So this is something which had been at the back of my mind for a few years, in terms of me wanting to start off. And at some point I reached the place where it was the right time to do it, and I did it. I know it doesn't actually cover a lot of nuances in terms of how all of that happened, but we are short on time. When you're an entrepreneur, what happens is you will be learning on the job every single day. You will need to know everything there is to know about anything related to your business, right? And that is something which you will have to learn continuously. So it is extremely rewarding because of two things. One is because you're actually building something of your own, and to me that is extremely valuable. And two, because you actually get to work on everything, whether it is sales, whether it is managing people, whether it is understanding finance. You need to know it all, and you will get to that place. So there is no question. Every single person who starts off, right, whether it is someone running a kirana store or someone running a $1 billion business, right, they all learn their business and do well, and which means that anyone can start, right? It does not need any specific degree, it does not require any specific knowledge. You will learn because you have to. right? So when coming specifically to, what we do, so what we've done is we built a product called Kidlet. Everyone, lots of students here, I'm assuming. So you know how education works, right? Especially school education. If you guys remember, what used to happen is that a teacher would come to class, she would actually cover specific topics within a subject, and she would go away, right? There were very few schools, there are very few schools today, even today, which basically keep track of, how well students are learning on a continuous basis. How this used to happen is there used to be exams on a regular basis, and that is how, a lot of schools still function. And, students were assessed based on those exams. What we built is a system which does two things. One is it lets students practice anything they're learning in the classroom on a continuous basis. So let's say a grade 5 student just learned about fractions in the class, right? They can go home and start answering questions on fractions, which will let them practice what they learned in the classroom today. It's directly, what we've built is directly linked to curriculum. So what that does is, a student is always working on things which, they have learned. The second thing which we do very well is that we track learning outcomes. So what happens is we track continuously in terms of, how well students are learning, what learning gaps are, what can be done to actually close those learning gaps and things like this. As part of our work, we work a lot with the government. So we work with government schools across Maharashtra. And that is something which, doing that actually removes a lot of misconceptions we have around government schools, right? As an example, I know a lot of students might not actually believe this, but a lot of the government schools in Mumbai are far better than a lot of the private schools which operate here, right? And obviously far cheaper because education in India, government education in India is free. You don't have to pay for it. So, it is something which, a lot of people don't really know about. And that is something which even I learned after I started working and, building my product. So there are these kind of things which, over the years, they've given me a lot of pleasure to actually be working in this space. And obviously to, work with government schools means that, we work in both urban as well as rural areas. And, the requirements of these schools are extremely different. In urban areas, schools don't have problems of access, right? The schools are nearby. One, two, schools have access to infrastructure, which can actually aid in education. Rural schools are extremely different. One is, schools are extremely far for a lot of people. They don't have infrastructure. They don't have as many teachers. Education is not as regular as it is in urban schools. So the challenges which you need to address in both these places are extremely different. And that is something which, I did not know when I started off. And I have learned because I worked in this space. And honestly, I'm glad that I actually started this, because otherwise there would be no way for me to understand how, learning happens in India, across India. And while we are still only in Maharashtra, but, I am hoping that we expand to other states and actually continue to creating an impact in how students learn, not just today, but, on a much larger scale, changing how, education happens. I know it's a large vision, but you can't actually create something and not dream big, right? And that is what we're doing as well.
I think it's really wonderful, Ritesh, the impact that you're trying to create through the continuous monitoring and through the rural area schools. I think what you're doing is wonderful, and hats off to you. And we need more people like you out there to be really trying to change education system from a different perspective. So, is there what is a large impact that you want to eventually have, and what is the most interesting insight that you have come to learn by starting Kidlet? If you could share that before we close the
So one
session.
of the big things which I learned is that the government actually knows what it's doing, right? It will come as a surprise to a lot of people that, the government actually knows what it's doing, but they do. Maybe not, the people you see on TV, but the people who are actually doing the work, a lot of them actually know what they're working on. They know exactly what is happening where, what is needed where, what can be done to help. things where they are needed and so on. So that is something which I would have never believed unless I saw it with my own eyes, and I have seen it, right? So never underestimate the power of the government, especially in areas where they're this large. And coming back to finance, they are just as large in finance. I don't know if everyone here tracked what happened with Paytm, for example, right? I don't know how many of the students here actually did that, but that was the government flexing its muscle, right? They finally sat up and said that, what you're doing is not right, and you need to change. And overnight, the company had to change exactly what they were doing, they were doing things, restructure the business completely to make it more compliant and so on, right? So the government is extremely interesting, and something you should be very, very clearly aware of. Sorry, I think I digressed quite a bit. Did I answer the question or not?
Yes, yes, definitely. Thanks a lot, Ritesh. I think this session has been very inspirational, very insightful. Thanks a lot for taking out your time today and answering to the students' queries. And sorry if we could not cover all the questions to the participants, but we
So
do have future finance sessions also.
if there are people who want to reach out to me, the best place to do that is actually connect with me on LinkedIn. When you're sending a connection request, it would be nice if you could actually send me a reference that you're coming from here, so that I actually accept the request. But if you want to reach out, feel free to actually add me on LinkedIn and send me a message. And you guys can get access to, very happy to chat with you guys if you have any more questions besides whatever you covered today.
Thanks a lot, Ritesh. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much for your time today. Hope all of you have a nice weekend. Take care. Bye.
Thanks so much for hosting me, and it was lovely being here.